Welcome to Supercool, the show about low-carbon innovations now scaling. Each week, we talk with the founders, CEOs, and executives, winning customers, growing revenue, and capturing market share by turning their carbon-cutting ideas into competitive advantage. This is the rise of the low-carbon economy, a multi-trillion-dollar transformation already underway. I'm your host, Josh Dorfman. Before we jump into today's show, I want to tell you about something new from Supercool. We recently released the Supercool Climate Adoption Playbook, a new course for founders, startups, and mature companies that are bringing climate solutions to market. It's built on deep insights from over 50 of today's leading climate companies who are rapidly scaling. The course shares the 5 adoption levers at the center of every successful climate company's go-to-market strategy. There's never been a better time to build a climate company than right now. And at Supercool, our mission is to learn from the best and share their stories and playbooks so together we can rapidly accelerate the low-carbon economy. The Climate Adoption Playbook gives you the insights and tools to win customers, grow revenue, and do it repeatedly. If you're building in the climate space and want to clear away barriers so you can win more customers, check out the course. You can find it at getsuper.cool. And now for today's show. A few years back, Brett Hauser won an award as a pioneer in electrification and the EV industry. But back in 2009, when Brett first told his wife he wanted to leave his career in private equity for opportunities in sustainability, she called him a lot of things. Pioneer, though, wasn't one of them. What pulled Brett out of private equity was his growing belief that you could line up big returns with big impact. He wanted the upside, and he wanted it to matter. And he was right about the opportunity. His first company, EV Connect, built the software that manages EV charging stations. That's the authentication, access controls, payments, the whole thing. The company was eventually sold to Schneider Electric. Next came Greenlots, an EV charging and grid services software company. Brett stepped in as CEO, grew it for 7 years, and eventually sold it to Shell. Along the way, a funny thing happened. On paper, he was running a software company. In reality, more than half of Greenlot's revenue was coming from something else: installing chargers, running power, dealing with landlords, working through utilities and permitting, the infrastructure side. And that got him thinking, where's the real bottleneck in EV charger rollouts? What's holding it back? It's not capital. There's plenty of money to be accessed. It's not technology. Fast chargers are already really good. It's not the customers, especially when you start to look at rideshare companies or corporate fleets. For light-duty vehicles, the economics of going electric are already strong, with or without tax incentives. The challenge actually is everything in between. It's the big, giant hassle in the middle. That's what Brett's taking on with Voltera. The company builds big charging depots for fleets, rideshare, delivery, and even autonomous vehicles in dense urban areas. That starts with purchasing the right real estate, the right parcel in the right neighborhood at a price that makes the model work. Then there's power. Voltera needs to work with utilities to line up enough electricity to run a professional stadium. That's 3 to 12 megawatts, but do it on less than 2 acres of pavement inside a city. Then there's the fact that the zoning code in most places still doesn't even know what to do with all this. And then there's the city itself. When Brett built a Voltera charging depot in Los Angeles, 14 different departments needed to approve the project before he could start work. That included the Department of Urban Forestry, which spent months deciding how many trees should go on the site, and more months approving what was planted. This is the part of electrification and the clean energy transition that nobody thinks about. Voltera does it not so the companies that run fleets don't have to, but because those companies never will. Structurally, they're not going to buy speculative land, sit in utility meetings for years, and debug zoning for a use that doesn't even yet exist. Now granted, if you're operating at the scale of a company like Amazon, you can invest the time and resources to figure this out. And if you want to know how Amazon does it, I spoke with their executives on Supercool episode 55 to get the inside story. It's fascinating and definitely worth a listen. But for most companies, doing this on their own simply isn't going to happen. They want chargers in place, ready to go when they're ready to electrify their fleet. So Brett has built a company around the playbook to get through this process as efficiently as possible. Because the upside of delivering charging depots for commercial fleets is enormous. And as we'll hear about today, Voltera already operates in 10 markets across the US, from San Francisco and Los Angeles to Miami and Atlanta, and now with many more projects in the pipeline. Here's my conversation with Brett. Brett, welcome to Supercool.
Great to be here. Thank you for having me.
You have been in this industry, it's now probably about a decade and a half, which in this industry, it's kind of like dog years in some sense, right? It moves so fast. You think, gosh, it's only been 15 years, give or take, but unbelievable how much has transpired. So we're going to get into your background and green loss, because we'll talk about Voltera and where this whole industry is moving around EV infrastructure and what needs to shift and what is shifting. I'm very excited to have this opportunity to talk with you. One of the things that I couldn't find, which really shocked me, just in looking at your background and the work you did before moving into EV infrastructure, is what was that trigger? What was the spark where you said, oh my gosh, I'm going to shift my career?
Interesting question. I had been in private equity working on a telematics fleet roll-up. And so I saw electrification of transportation happening and coming on the forefront. I also felt that some of the antics in private equity at the time, just about trying to get financial returns without thinking about the actual benefits to the community at large, were missing. And so what brought me to electrification, I wanted to feel good about the business or about the business I was in, and also wanted to feel good about how I was going about my business. So sustainable business, but sustainable relationships as well, right? It shouldn't be like, if you have an opportunity to do well in this world, you can also do well by the partners you're doing with and bring everyone along together. And so that was the ethos behind why I got into what I did. And I haven't looked back since.
Interesting. So let's just start there, because that is fascinating to me. It's always fascinating to me how people come to sustainability, how business people find that kind of that moment or that way in, people with different backgrounds leaping in. And we've talked to certainly several CEOs over the past year who came from a private equity background and saw something and were like, I have to leap. Maybe it was a portfolio company or some technology, and they're like, wait, what? Like, we talked to this guy, Sam Ramadori, who was in private equity, and he became the CEO of Brainbox AI, which is doing really cool stuff around bringing down the cost of HVAC and energy consumption. They got acquired by Trane earlier this year. It's a really interesting way and skill set to bring to this topic. And like we're going to talk about today, I think for most people, even most people in, let's say, sustainability in general, still don't have an appreciation. I know it's really new for me, and it's really because we've been doing this podcast, building this platform, of how challenging or just the complexity behind electrification infrastructure, and particularly EV infrastructure. You think, well, why can't there just be another fast charger station in my city or my town or around the corner, without really having any understanding of the dynamics that are at play to actually try to make that happen. And it's just a really interesting place where you've said, you know what, I'm going to go apply my expertise in finance and infrastructure and whatever else to really make a difference here.
Yeah, look, for me, getting into it was also twofold. At the time, I had a son who was 2 years old, and I also felt called to try to do something impactful, in the world. EV electrification was just starting to happen. It's funny. I won an award a few years ago for like Energy Pioneer. And I remember saying that when I told my wife I wanted to leave my private equity job and move to the operations side and get into electrification of transportation, she called me many things, but Pioneer was not one of them, right? It wasn't for the faint of heart, right? But I had a conviction that I could make an impact and we could do good.
I love it.
16 years later, here we are.
Yeah, exactly. Here we are. So that is a funny thing then, because that does seem to be the way this conversation goes for private equity professionals when they go home and they tell their wives that they're making the switch. Because that we have heard. That does sound like there's a commonality there. I'm going to leave my well-earned, probably safe, secure, very nice lifestyle and make the leap for the reasons that you're laying out. So bring us up to speed. I don't want to dwell too much on the past, but I think to understand Voltera today, it's going to be really helpful for our audience to have a deeper sense of kind of your background and how you've gotten to what you're now working on with your current company.
I've been in electrified transportation now going on 16 years, and it is dog years. By the way, you had that spot on. Helped start a company called EV Connect, which was sold to Schneider Electric a few years ago. Became CEO of a company called Greenlots, which is an EV charging and grid services software company. That was more on the front end, right? It allowed operators of networks of chargers, whether it was 2 in one location or tens of thousands around the world, to be able to manage the back end of that, be able to set authentication, access control, authentication, the type of electrons that you were going to be providing. Also allowed consumers to be able to interact with the charging assets themselves when they showed up, being able to pay and all those types of things. a software company, but we actually spent, or I would say half of our revenue came from the actual installation of the chargers themselves. To your point, people think this is an easy thing. You can pop it down. And what we always found is that it wasn't just enough to sell the front end application. People needed help with the actual procurement of the infrastructure, the actual deployment of the infrastructure. And that is still the case today. It is not for the faint of heart. Being able to identify the right location to put chargers, being able to bring the power to the location, not easy. And we found a lot of times that the customers that wanted to actually install the infrastructure didn't control the dirt underneath them, right? They were leasing it or lending it. So it was like going through two sales cycles. Once you convinced the customer that they actually needed the chargers, and then you had to go back and find out who the landlord was, explain to them why this made sense for them, and that even if the lease of their tenant didn't extend to the amount of time it was going to take to pay for the infrastructure, it was still worth their while. And so it became very evident to me that you needed to kind of control the land underneath, right? It all came down to control. You can own the real estate. You control your own destiny with this. And that actually was the genesis of what happened with Voltera. And that's how it got started.
Okay, cool. With Voltera, now you've got this pipeline of sites you're building out across the country. There are a number of them that are operable in California, sounds like Texas, Arizona, maybe some other places I understand. But you talk about site identification, you talk about site acquisition, power procurement. There's a very similar conversation happening today, obviously around AI, and people also don't really understand that either, about what it takes just before even a data center goes up to actually make sure, like, can we access a site? Can we access power? Is this in the right location? So with Voltera, what gaps are you seeing? I mean, I know you've started with drayage and some of the things with ports on the West Coast, but it sounds like the need is so vast. Can you talk to us about the market that you're entering and you're serving? Because as I understand it, on the commercial side of electrification, there's like less than 1% penetration today. I don't know if that's accurate, but would love to kind of get your insight into the market and the opportunity you're serving.
Yeah, I mean, so 1% penetration as it relates to commercial vehicles themselves? Yeah, it is low today. There's a lot of opportunity in the market. There's been a lot of push in the last few years around medium heavy duty electrification. I think that will happen. It's going to take some time. We made a lot of progress with battery density, battery price, but I still think there needs to be a lot more evolution in there. Where we are trying to focus now is meet the market where the opportunity is, and that is still around light duty electrification, right? The total cost of ownership operation makes sense. You see the intersection of light duty electrification and autonomous. Autonomous doesn't have to be electric, but it makes sense. And so we see a lot of opportunity in and around urban centers to work with the fleets that are out there to understand where they're going to be going and trying to get control of the real estate today so that we can meet the needs of the market when they're ready. And that is going like gangbusters today. Okay.
Can you give us like a couple of examples of the types of companies or, types of customers that might be? Or
I wish I could tell you our roster of clients today, but anyone, if you think of all the major rideshare companies that are out there today, you think of the AV fleets that you're seeing. We work with them. We work with their partners to try to get out and develop sites so that they can operate their fleets. We're in 10 markets today: San Francisco, Los Angeles, Phoenix, Dallas, Austin, Houston, Miami, Atlanta, with more on the horizon. 10 depots today, 360 charging stalls, 35 megawatts of power, and double that amount in development today. And the interesting thing about these sites and AV, it's not just about the fueling of the vehicle. It's also going to be things like inspecting of the vehicles and the cleaning of the vehicles. Like all this has to be integrated. And whereas we are an infrastructure company, right? So I'm not creating the technologies. We have to be very capable of taking the best of breed technologies and integrating them so that our customers can have a seamless experience at our sites.
Let me ask you this. I mean, the economics increasingly point to an EV future. It may not be a direct straight line, but in some technologies, it does look that way. The cost declines in batteries, the value proposition will become increasingly obvious over time. I mean, EVs are going to win, at least in terms of a lot of that technology. But it sounds like a business like Voltera is stepping in and saying, yes, provided that this other thing that's not readily understood is happening as well, which is the infrastructure comes in that actually enables fleets or businesses to move toward EVs, right? The unlock isn't necessarily, oh yeah, cool, that light duty vehicle or whatever is, I want that. It's like, can I actually make that work for my business? Is that the opportunity that you see? I mean, really building that infrastructure layer that EVs and fleets can sit on or drive on?
To answer your question, I think we are creating the unlock, right? Identifying the sites and getting the power. Voltera is a spinoff of a data center business, EdgeConneX, being able to put their locations, the data centers where there's high amounts of power, right? So we have that, and getting through all the permitting and coordinating. So we have that DNA. The difference between what we're doing is we can't necessarily go to where the power is when you're customer facing. You have to be able to site depots where our customers can then access their own customers. So we have to be able to go in, identify real estate, and then be able to work with utilities in a timely fashion to be able to get anywhere from 3 to 12 megawatts of power in and around urban centers. Not an easy thing to do. Utilities today are getting better, but in a lot of ways we're dealing with, so we've got 21st century technology and we're dealing with 20th century, some might even say further back, type of bureaucracy and processes. And that is a challenge for all of us if we want to meet the needs of the market. We've got to figure out how to streamline the application process, the permitting process, so that we can get these depots in the ground on a timely basis. And again, it's not an easy thing to do, right? We are trying to put a stadium's worth of power into a less than 2-acre site and want to get that done in 18 to 24 months. Not an easy thing.
I can absolutely see that. Yet you have now, it sounds like 20 plus sites across the country. Are you able to do this because you're bringing the experience? Like what's the differentiator for Voltera where someone calls you guys up and says, hey, we need someone to figure this out for us. And you're like, oh yeah, we're the ones to figure it out for you because we've already done X, Y, Z.
We get the reps. We keep doing it. We know how to go into a market. So let me take half a step back. 16 years ago, when I got into the space, there were 0 zoning permits that allowed you to use charging as a primary purpose for a site. 16 years ago, you would expect that, right? EVs were on the horizon, or people hadn't even been thinking about EVs at the time. 16 years later, maybe 3 cities or 4 allow that by right. That's a shock. You'd think we'd be further along there. So understanding what the permitting process is like, how to leverage the existing permitting process. So if it has to be an operation building, and charging as an ancillary service, understanding that, trying to do a lot of education, work with the AHJs, whether it's the Bureau of Engineering, Department of Buildings, Department of Urban Forestry, or some of the more esoteric ones, bringing everyone along so that they understand what we're trying to accomplish, how we're going about it, and trying to change the codes. We're actually making these markets in real time. The fact that we have a fair amount of capital at our disposal, we can go into these markets. We can start buying properties ahead of time before our customers might have even acknowledged that they're going to go into a market. We can start working with the utilities, the other AHJs, to make sure that by the time they're ready to contract there, we've already gone through the pre-development work. When we sign a contract, we can deliver a site to our customers within 12 to 18 months. And that's a surety that they want and need to be able to operate their business.
Wow. Okay. So I understand that you're under some confidentiality agreements, but as I'm listening to you talk about how you do that kind of advanced work, does that imply that you've got certain customers you're anticipating they're going to want to electrify in, I don't know, we're going to just pick random markets here, but like they're in LA, they want to go to Dallas, they want to go to Houston, they want to go to Miami, they want to go wherever, but you're looking further ahead and saying, hey, we know that our customers are going to want to be in these markets. Let's go get out in front of this and start to do that advanced work. Is that what that looks like? I mean, just help me understand the dynamics.
First and foremost, we're real estate developers. The tip of the spear is finding the right property for the right price point. And if we do that right, we've already mitigating our risk, right? We should be in a good position to help our customers when that time comes. Now, in that time, before a customer has even maybe indicated that they're going to want to go to that market, we have got to be working to get that property entitled. Make sure that it is zoned appropriately, that we have plans that can be built on there, that we have a clear pathway to power. This all comes down to power and working with the utilities to make sure that we can have that done. And also working on what I'll call interim power solutions in the event that the utility is not able to meet the timelines that they have set forth to us, so that we can, again, ensure that our customers can go live on a site when we have promised.
Got it. You're working in and around urban markets. You identify the real estate. In identifying that real estate, you've said that the key is you got to find the real estate for the right price. You've got to get the power to that land, a 2-acre site, a stadium's worth of power. With enough advanced work, if you're working with a utility, can virtually any site be operationalized in that way?
Yes, in theory, but at what cost? If you buy a site X and the closest substation is 2 miles away and you got a trench from 2 miles away to get power to that site, that might be too expensive, right? And it's not going to work. So yes, in theory, that can be done. In reality, you've got to be a bit more pragmatic about where you actually decide to place your bets in terms of buying real estate.
You've talked about, just an example, rideshare companies. Now, as I also understand it, Voltera is working with or has eyes on working with companies who are delivering into cities, kind of last mile delivery. So maybe you're siting near a major warehouse or something where you're then going to have that facility where their last mile fleets, I don't know if it's Amazon or somebody else, it's now got all different types of electric vehicles, moving around cities, 3-wheelers and otherwise. Is that also the type of thing where you say, hey, let's go figure out how we service these kinds of companies?
Absolutely. All have to be located within urban, around urban zones where a lot of the charging needs to take place. The goal for those vehicles is they don't want to have to go back to base, like maybe where they start off. So you have to have almost like pop-up charging locations in and around urban areas so that they can charge where they need to.
Okay, so here's what I mean. At Voltera, you talk about aligning control, coordination, the capital. So it sounds like you've lined up the capital to be able to go gain control. And it also sounds like the sequencing here is critical to getting this business right. Like if you're laying out all this cash, but the business isn't showing up, but yet you got to lay out the cash because you have to go do all the advance work, right? You got to get that site ready for the right moment. I mean, it just sounds like I guess it's that coordination layer, which means probably many different things, right? You've got to coordinate a number of different stakeholders to get that property ready. You've got to get it ready for the customer to come. And then like you said though, Brett, you're delivering a technology solution, but you don't define yourselves as a technology company. It's just like a really interesting mix, kind of strikes me as business model innovation that is the key to this unlock that's going to enable electrification of commercial fleets.
That's right. And you hit on our 3 C's, right? Control, coordination, and capital. The control up front, we identify, purchase, and entitle sites before customers sign the contracts. By actually controlling the sites, then we can control our own destiny. I mentioned at the top of our discussion that in the early days of green lots, you would sell a customer that says, yes, we want to electrify, but I don't own my land. And so now we got to go talk to the landlord. We are the landlord in this case. If you can control the land, you can control your own destiny. So that's the first piece of it. And then from there, it's the coordination, bringing the utilities and the local agencies together to start and align on permitting from the get-go. And then, of course, the capital, which we mentioned. I mean, that's the kind of connective tissue. If you don't have the capital to do this, if you don't have the capital to buy the property, to take the time to appropriately get these things permitted, it's not going to happen. So you have to have all 3 of these things to be successful. And we believe we have all the ingredients to continue to be market innovators and market leaders.
I'm a company that's doing last mile delivery. I don't know, whoever I am. Maybe I'm UPS, maybe I'm Amazon, maybe I'm a regional distributor. Who knows? Doesn't matter. But I realized hey, we want to electrify. We think it makes sense to do that. And then they assign someone probably, and I don't know, logistics or ops, say, hey, go figure this out for us. And then that exec comes back, he's like, yeah, it's not going to happen. And they're like, well, what do you mean it's not going to happen? It's like, well, let me just explain to you, basically, Brett, what you just laid out, like all of this complexity, or at least it's certainly not going to happen in the next 2 to 3 years if we can even figure it out ourselves, which we probably can't, because it's so far out of scope for what our actual business does, right? So then it's like, okay, you guys are stepping into that breach to fulfill this gap, to enable the electrification to go forward. How big can Voltera get? I mean, you've got 20 sites. Is it 200 sites? Is it 2,000 sites? What is the need here and the opportunity?
The need ultimately is going to be thousands of sites. But if you think about where this is going, where electrification is headed, you think about what's happening in the AV space, the rideshare space, both medium and heavy duty, we're just scratching the surface of what's possible and, quite frankly, what's needed. So the scale, the opportunity is there. But it is going to be hand-to-hand combat for a while. It'd be great if there was a federal framework with which and how to deploy charging. Like if you're going to deploy charging in a certain area, you have the same set of rules that you have to go with in terms of the permitting, in terms of getting the power. but it's not. It is hand-to-hand combat in every different region, every different city. And in fact, in some cities, one side of the street could be with one utility, the other side of the street could be another, completely two different handbooks. So understanding that, recognizing that, and getting really good at that and being an expert is what allows us to continue to deliver to our customers.
What in a playbook can be more universal? I get that we've got to get really good at the specifics of understanding this utility that we want to work with. And you said it's reps, but I know we've got 3,000 some odd utilities right in this country. Not all of them are in urban settings where you're going to be.
Right.
But what transfers? What do you drill into where you get really good, like, hey, we can move this faster, or we can actually engage quicker or more efficiently, or get to the successful outcomes we want faster as a result of knowing how to work with utilities?
It's not just the utility itself, but you've got the utility. Again, it could be Department of Buildings, Department of Engineering, in the cities as well. Sometimes things are done in parallel. A lot of times they're sequential. We had one site in LA where we needed to get 14 different agencies to sign off on permits from their area before we could actually do work. And it would be great if everyone could do their sign-offs at the same time. And some of them could, but then there's others that want to wait until the other one is done before they go ahead and do their work. So being able to recognize what has to happen when is part of the challenge. I mentioned the Department of Urban Forestry earlier. Again, the aesthetic of these sites is important to a community. And we want to, at baseline, blend in, and we want to elevate that aesthetic whenever we possibly can. But to wait 2 to 4 months to have to get feedback on how many trees they actually think we should plant, as opposed to being able to self-certify, and then waiting another 2 to 4 months for them to approve what we did plant, that's a bit onerous. But understanding those nuances in that particular region with that particular city allows us to get quicker and more efficient, right? The more you do these things, the more you understand the nuances, the intricacies, the better you are at being able to successfully deliver on time, on budget, and in scope.
Right before we came on air, we talked about, how are we feeling today? Were we feeling centered, right? And it's like, my gosh, man, pick a harder problem. We talk to entrepreneurs who are picking hard problems, and often they're excited. I'll give you an example. Just last week, we were talking with this woman, Candice Shea. She runs a company called VO. VO does micro-mobility in cities, and they've really figured out, I think she would argue the same thing. A lot of our core competence, the reason why we can be in 50 markets and be profitable is because we've figured out how to be a partner to cities. That is our core competence as much as it is the hardware, right? We're driving our business around that. Otherwise, at this point, you're going to get kicked out, or you just can't get through anymore because all the ones who took over cities, they're largely gone. And so it sounds to me, as I've talked with her and some other entrepreneurs who are working with cities or school districts, when you figure it out, and when you build a core competence around being able to do the types of things you're describing, in other industries, that becomes kind of part of the moat. Or it's like we can go in somewhere and we can succeed where we know others are going to struggle because we have this core competence. You can't patent it, but it's the proprietary playbook of how we operate, which gives us a real advantage. Is that how you see it?
Technically, no competitive moat, right? I cannot tell you that I have IP around the process for getting something deployed within 18 months in the city of LA. But I think I'm pretty good at doing it. And I think I know what levers to pull and who to talk to. And we talk about the challenges with utilities. Yeah, there are challenges, but they are your partners. And you've got to meet them where they are as well. And you've got to help them and educate them and understand that they are doing the best job that they can possibly do. You've got to hold people accountable, but you've also got to show some grace. People are trying to do the best that they can in the environment they have with the resources that they've been given. And sometimes those resources are limited. And it's frustrating on our side sometimes because we're going to hit those deadlines for our customers, come hell or high water. And so we've got to figure out how to make that happen. And I think I mentioned this a little earlier from a utility standpoint. We are deploying interim or temporary power solutions to try to mitigate that risk, right? And whether that's with microgrids, with battery storage, even natural gas generation at times, we can actually make sure that we have power available to a customer, even if the utility is a little behind on their delivery timelines.
Yeah, I really love that, Brett, to be able to grow up with this industry and be in this place now where you've seen the need and you understand, okay, we need to really move this forward. It's not so much about the technology, as you've said. We're dealing with really cutting-edge 21st century technology on a system that in many respects is still mired in processes that are mired in the 20th century. And that's And the question, how do we align those, right, so we can really drive the change that we want to see, that customers want to see, and even that cities want, that the places where you're operating, where they want to see too, right? But it's like, how do we move forward? So with all that said, how do you assess the role and the evolution of utilities today?
When you're building a warehouse or pick your asset class, you can see it going in the ground. You know the timing it's going to take because we've been doing this forever. And so a utility can kind of appropriately meet those timelines because they do have a lot of reps at this. This is all new work. And so the same processes that they have used to energize a warehouse is not the same thing that you're going to need for a charging depot. Some utilities have recognized that, and they have created new departments or new people to try to forget the old and figure out what's the art of yes. How do we get this done within a certain time frame? We forget the old stovepipes. We're going to create a new process flow that's going to allow us to deliver these sites within a reasonable amount of time. We see that happening more and more. We see success with that. I think the more utilities try to innovate themselves to the extent that they can and put people specifically on this to come up with new processes, new ways of behavior, then I think we can meet the moment. Again, it's not just the power we need. We think what we need is a lot of power. AI and what data centers need, I mean, we're small in comparison to that. So innovation is absolutely going to continue to happen.
We've had on Camus, which is building a software layer to try and help utilities, one, just have the knobs to control how they move into a distributed energy type landscape. We've had on Span, creating the electrical panel for homes. We've explored what's going on with utilities. When you say certain utilities are leading in this regard, I mean, really trying to figure out how they can be proactive and innovative. You're now in many markets across the country. Where do you see that happening?
I see it happening in California, for sure. I think the intention is there. I think the resources are still constrained. But I think you see it happening in places like Austin, Texas as well. Austin Energy has a whole team dedicated to helping with electrification. 16 years ago, there were no cities that actually had permitting by right for EV charging that there were 4 today. Austin is one of them. Austin is very progressive, understands what is going to happen, what is needed, and the city and the utility are working in lockstep with customers to try to meet the needs and meet their energy demands.
Full circle on Voltera. We've got a sense of what goes into getting this project pipeline built out, getting in early, sequencing, establishing relationships, all the folks you got to go work with to get a site live. We've talked about the types of customers, who they may be. What's the business model once you're live? As coarsely as my dad would say it to me when I'm like, Dad, here's my latest, greatest, I'd be like, that all sounds great, Josh. How do you make money?
We build sites. People are paying us a site license fee to operate, to use the sites. And then there's, service agreements to be able to keep those sites up and running 99.98% of the time. And that's how we make our money. The economics of it are simple enough to follow along. The art is actually being able to deliver a site in the right location on the right timeline that's going to meet our customer's price point.
Stay on that customer for just another beat. You get a site live in Texas or Santa Monica, San Francisco. What's the demand like? Is there more demand than you can supply right now? Do you see more and more companies wanting to move in this direction?
In the AV space, you see a lot of big announcements about partnerships and some of these companies setting targets for the number of vehicles they're going to have by 2028. If you believe in an autonomous future, I think the future is bright for companies like Voltera. There's going to be more opportunity, more demand than there might be supply, quite frankly. So the goal for us is going to be continue to get out in front, anticipate, and continue to identify those locations, those markets, and the properties in those markets that we think are going to meet the needs of our customers and their geofences when they're going to market. We continue to do that. We continue to get more reps, continue to be able to deliver projects on time, on scope, within budget. I think we win. Let me just take a half a step back. It takes a village. There are other companies out there. We all are collectively working together to bring an electrified transportation future together. And so it's not just about one. There shouldn't be winners and losers. There's enough opportunity for everyone where we can all win and have a piece of the market share.
Yeah, if you're not in the industry, like you could be in sustainability, or you could be working in green buildings or some other component of circularity. You still wouldn't have a deep understanding of these. You would think, oh, Tesla, yeah, just sell more Teslas and then you get more EVs. And you don't think that, oh, no, there's actually an EV transportation ecosystem and infrastructure that all needs to be there to enable those vehicles, whatever make, whatever model, to scale. All this underlying infrastructure has to move in lockstep to get to that future. And these can be massive businesses, incredibly profitable businesses, right? And hugely important businesses. And as you said, there's a lot of them that together are going to build this future. But it's just not always something that we readily understand it because, I don't know, maybe it's less visible. I mean, this is a part of the clean energy transition, which is just, I think, so critical, but just less understood.
I would agree with that. And to any fleet operator that is thinking about electrifying, I would strongly suggest don't wait till 30 days before your vehicles are arriving to start thinking about your charging infrastructure. That should be the first thing we think about, right? Because it's going to take some time. And for any company thinking about it, don't put it all on your fleet manager and operator because they don't necessarily understand real estate. I talk about it takes a village. It takes a village, within the community to get a charging station up and running. It takes a village within these companies as well. Cross collaboration between the different groups to actually make electrification happen within your company and at scale.
You've also talked about the fact that today the real momentum around electrification and EV is taking place more at the state and local level. What does that mean to say that there's this real shift to the state and local level pushing this industry forward?
Fundamentally, like at the light duty level and at the medium duty level, the economics for electrification works. The TCO, the total cost of ownership or operation, makes sense versus an internal combustion engine. So the subsidies aren't necessarily needed. Now, they do have political ramifications, right? People hear the market sentiment and they think, well, is this something I need to be focusing on or should be focusing on? But if you get down and you're looking at it from an economic perspective, electrification makes sense. Where there's still more work to do, I would say, is in the heavy duty segment. California has their HVIP grants, which are helping to pay down the cost of Class A trucks. I would say we still need help from the OEMs to actually bring the cost down, right? If we can't get to cost parity, it's not going to work. I think Tesla and their Semi and the price point that's going to come out to is going to be a game changer. Back in 2016, 2017, it was the introduction of the Model 3 and the Model Y, where it wasn't just about price point, it was about market share. And that's what helped for innovation. People wanted to make sure that they couldn't lose market share. I think the same thing needs to happen at the Class 8 truck level. I think it's going to happen. So I think all these things are going to continue. And I think, yes, there's some headwinds, political headwinds, but I think it's a very short-term phenomena. And I don't think it's going to impact the overall adoption of electrification. And I think further to that point, if the U.S. wants to continue to be seen as industry leaders and on the cutting edge, we're going to have to do it to keep up.
You may have just answered the question, but to me, the economics, medium term, long term, are basically undeniable. You mentioned the Tesla Semi. We've heard others talk about how that's going to be a game changer. We had Forum Mobility on the show a few months ago. We talked about electrification and drayage and what's happening at the ports, the arrival of the Tesla Semi. So we know that this is going to be a game changer, but it does increasingly just seem like the economics for EVs, for electrification. I mean, someone said to me recently, they're like, thankfully, all this clean energy stuff, actually, it's just better. The economics get better. And I mean, thankfully, it's not about sacrifice. It's just, it's taken a moment, a couple of decades for all the technology to get to that point where the cost curves kick in, and now the economics are practically there. Just amazing. So maybe this is a long-winded way of saying, is that how you assess this moment too?
Yes. The technology, it has continued to evolve, right? Batteries are denser, they're cheaper, the charging capacity has gotten greater. I mean, you see what's coming out in the market. You can charge 400 miles in 15 minutes. I mean, it's all there. Where we are lagging, again, is in the bureaucracy around the deployment of the infrastructure. That has to keep up with the pace of innovation. If we don't get that moving at the pace of innovation, then we are not going to be able to compete.
Beyond the work that you do with Voltera today, and I know you've talked about advocating to work around codes. How is the industry trying to enable like a Voltera to move 10 times faster, to enable the industry to build infrastructure? How do you get everyone on board with that change? And I know we only have 5 minutes, so you're like, Josh, I'll have to go back, probably for like 3 more episodes to really unpack that. But what's the high level?
Yeah, look, I talk about we're making markets today, right? And the markets happen at the federal, state, and city level. And so maybe there's not a lot of activity happening in Washington, D.C. today, although there is some. but a lot of the focus has been at the state and the city level. And it's the education about what reforms are needed, what needs to happen to enable the pace of electrification to happen at scale. And so it's working and educating there. And then at the city level, education about what are best practices, what needs to happen so that we can actually streamline the permitting process and we can get these things done in time. Look, City of LA, we got LA 28 coming up. I'm going to throw this out there. I'm throwing down the gauntlet, right? We want this to be a zero emission Olympics. We got a long way to go. And let me take half a step back, right? The unfortunate incident of Altadena and in the Pacific Palisades have put a big stress on the system. We have to acknowledge that. But if we want to meet the moment in the Olympics, and these things take 18 to 24 months to get permitted and approved and energized, if I do my math correctly, we're almost at 2026. 2028 is right around the corner. So we have to do more. And there is an intent and a desire to do that. And we talk about putting tiger teams together in the city of LA, trying to figure out how we expedite the permitting for those things that can't be done with permanent infrastructure, temporary power, and how can we meet the moment there. But it's things like that. I think there'll be a lot of lessons learned about what's coming out of the city of LA. And what we do to meet the moment for the Olympics, I think will be an indication of how best practices can be deployed elsewhere in the United States.
Awesome. Well, Brett, I want to thank you for taking the time to come talk with me today. And we will certainly be following and rooting for you and Voltera to keep pushing this forward. Truly admire the work you're doing in the trenches to, you talked about hand-to-hand combat and what needs to happen to push this forward. I know it's a big opportunity, obviously. I know obviously you see that way too. But yeah, I really have a lot of respect for the work that you all are doing and wish you continued success.
Thanks, Josh. Appreciate it. Appreciate you. I loved having the conversation today.
And thank you for listening today. If you're enjoying Supercool and appreciate the way we approach the conversation around climate, innovation, and the future of commerce, please take a moment to subscribe and leave us a review. It's the best way you can help us reach other future-forward decision makers who would benefit from these conversations too.